Harold Shipman, known as Dr. Death, was a British physician and serial killer believed to be responsible for the deaths of around 250 people, making him one of the most dangerous serial killers in modern history. Born in 1946 in Nottingham, England, he worked as a physician between 1972 and 1998. The majority of his victims were elderly women, and he used lethal doses of morphine to end their lives, sometimes forging their wills in his favor. He killed 250 of his patients during his 18 years of practicing medicine by injecting them with large quantities of narcotics that led to their death. Read about the crime that shook Britain, and the investigation into some of its unknown chapters is still ongoing to this day. Harold Shipman, the killer physician, or as the saying goes, a doctor who treats people while he is sick. A doctor is supposed to help treat people's diseases and alleviate their pain, not to be the cause of their death and taking their lives. This is exactly what Harold Frederick Shipman, the English doctor who took the lives of 250 of his patients during the 18 years he spent practicing medicine, did. He broke the record for serial killers in Britain, and even in the whole world, in the number of his victims. It is true that he did not act and tamper with the bodies of his victims as most serial killers do, but rather he simply injected them with a horrific injection of a medical drug that causes their death slowly and without shedding a single drop of blood. However, he remains the most famous criminal the world has ever known. No matter how different the method of killing is, death remains death. As they say, the causes are many, but death is one. Shipman was born in Nottingham, England. His mother died of lung cancer in 1963 when he was 17. He entered the University of Leeds Medical School in 1965, where he met Primrose, who later became his wife in 1966, with whom he had 4 children. In 1970, he graduated from medical school and began working in a clinic in a small town south of Leeds. It was in this clinic that he began his murder spree, which lasted for 18 years. In 1974, he worked as a GP in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. In 1975, he was discovered to have forged prescriptions for pethidine, a morphine-like drug, for his own use, so he was sent to a drug rehabilitation center in York. After recovering from his addiction, he worked as a GP at Hyde Hospital near Manchester in 1977. He continued this work throughout the 1980s until he opened his own clinic in 1993. In 1998, suspicions began to surround Parker due to the high mortality rate among his patients, especially elderly women, but the police were unable to find any evidence to convict Chapman of killing his patients. In the following months before he was arrested, Chapman killed 3 women. His last victim was a woman named Kathleen Crandy, who had previously held the position of mayor, as she was found dead in her home on June 24, 1998. The last person to see her alive was Dr. Chapman, who also signed her death certificate. What raised the most suspicion about Shipman was when the daughter of Grande, his last victim, discovered that her mother had given £386,000 to Shipman in her will, which made her go to the police, who began conducting extensive investigations and performed an autopsy on Grande's body and found traces of diamorphine, classified like heroin but legal in Britain for pain relief, in the body. Shipman was arrested on the 7th of September 1998, and they discovered that he had a printer of the type used to print Grande's forged will. After Shipman was arrested, the police began to open the files of his other patients during his years as a doctor, and they discovered the method by which Shipman killed his victims, where he would inject his patients with diamorphine, an amount sufficient to kill them, then sign their death certificates and falsify the medical records to make his victims appear to be very sick and in poor health. Shipman's trial began on the 5th of October 1999. He was charged with 15 counts of murder between 1995 and 1998, and was convicted of all of them in 2000. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. The death penalty is abolished in Britain, without any right to appeal, meaning he will remain in prison until the end of his life. Shipman denied all the crimes against him and never admitted to committing them. As a result of his conviction, the investigations into the remaining cases were closed, and many believe that his trial was unfair as the police believe that Shipman was responsible during his career for the deaths of several hundred victims. The reason for Shipman killing all these victims remains unknown. Some believe that the reason is related to the experience of his mother dying of cancer in his early youth, which left him with a psychological complex. Others believe that Shipman was fond of conducting experiments and tests on narcotic medical drugs, and that he applied his experiments to his patients. Others believe that he did it for money, especially after discovering jewelry worth £10,000 in the garage of his house, where some of the pieces were identified as belonging to his victims. There are other theories, but the real reason remains unknown, especially since Shipman himself has not and will never admit to committing these crimes. On the morning of January 13, 2004, Shipman was found dead in his cell, having hanged himself with a bedsheet. Thus, the true number of Shipman's victims remains unknown. According to medical records, there are 459 deaths of patients who were under his care, and police believe that Shipman was responsible for the deaths of at least 250 of them, most of whom were elderly women in good health.